Hi, my name is Michelle Fondin. Let's get reacquainted. And if you are brand new to this channel, let's get acquainted. Today, I'm going to be talking about a part of my personal story, my personal background that I actually never talk about. Even my own children don't know much of this story. I'm gonna tell it to you, and there's a reason why I'm sharing this with you and why teaching personal power and especially women's empowerment is so important to me. When you hear my backstory, you'll understand why. I'm the author of 12 published books, and I'm gonna show 2 of my books today. My very first published book, The Wheel of Healing with Ayurveda, an easy guide to a healthy lifestyle, and The Empowered Divine Feminine, Becoming an Unstoppable Woman in the 21st Century and Beyond. All of my published books are on Amazon and 10 on Ingram Spark. If you're brand new to this channel, welcome. This is gonna be a little weird one. You're gonna get to know me personally, in this one. So welcome. Thank you for subscribing below. Click on the bells, scroll up to all for all notifications, and thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. Please join me on Monday, February 16th of 2026 at 5:30 p.m. Pacific time to learn more about immersion into meditation, learning a mantra-based meditation practice. You can come in for the Q&A. I'll give you the course outline. There will be some book giveaways during that time. It'll be totally laid back. You can ask anything you want about learning meditation. You need to sign up. The link is below. I'm here with my pals, Grogu, and 2 different types of Gudetama. I am also here with my writer's tumbler with my Tocino Dandelion Caramel Nut Tea. Still writing my upcoming book, Love Me Unconditionally, A Spiritual Guide to Self-Love. That will be released on May 20th of 2026. This vlog number 32 is going to be a little bit long, I can tell already. So get your cup of tea, coffee, hot chocolate, favorite beverage, and please sit back, relax, and join me for this vlog. If you hear some noise in the background, I just want to preface it by saying my little cat Mocha is currently playing with her toys right at my feet, so that is the noise you are hearing. Let's go to the why. Why am I sharing this piece of my personal history that I have never shared or shared very, very tiny bit with anybody? Like I said, my kids don't even know this story, or they might know bits and pieces of the story, but very little. I received a communication from a reader of one of my books. And after browsing the email very gently and not thoroughly, I immediately deleted it because I don't take open criticism and insults. That is my boundary. But the email did say something about me misunderstanding the common folk and having white privilege, which is kind of hilarious because I'm not even white, I'm half white. So I was like, okay, that's really interesting. And I don't even come from privilege at all, as you will see in this story. And so I felt like maybe there's something there to the fact that my readers and my viewers who have seen me on YouTube and read my books, they know the front-facing me. They know the me now. I started publishing YouTube videos in 2011, but really didn't start regularly posting till around 2015. So as a result, the person you see here, the person you see front-facing on YouTube and maybe Instagram is the person that I am today. It's not the person I was. It's not the person I grew up as. It's the person you currently see. So you see this person who lives in Huntington Beach, California, the one who is happy, jovial, energetic. I've always been really energetic, who is positive and upbeat and uplifting, the person who likes to talk a lot and the person who likes to teach a lot. You see the person who goes to Disneyland and runs races and does all this fun stuff. But that is not the person I was as I was growing up. And so I felt that maybe there's a little bit of disconnect with the person I grew up as and the person who is teaching through videos and books. And so I felt maybe that is the missing link. Maybe the missing link is me talking about my psychological development, which I talk about a lot in my videos and books, me talking about my most recent relationships, and maybe my marriage relationship was in adulthood, right? That wasn't in my childhood. And maybe sprinkling in some stories about my mother growing up, my father growing up, which is really tied more to my own inner healing. But I've never really given you guys a full picture of what I grew up in. And I think that is probably the most important element that has been left out that can tie my story into why I talk about personal power, women's empowerment, self-actualization, self-realization, and the fact that I can be blunt sometimes, the fact that my teachings can really get to the core of what's going on. My teachings can be like a sharp needle, like hitting you. And it's because of my core beliefs of personal transformation and first-handed beliefs of personal development and personal transformation. But it's coming from interior knowledge. It's not coming from knowledge that is totally abstract, only reading books, for example, right? This is coming from me knowing this firsthand. So let me give you a background of my parents. Let's go back, way, way back before my birth. I was born in 1970, but this story goes back further. My father was from Iraq. You know the country Iraq? You know the really tumultuous country of Iraq? My father was born and raised in Iraq in a very poor family. The stories that my father tells me is that there were more than 10 of them, maybe 12, maybe 14, living in one room for his entire life. So we're talking about one room, like a studio apartment in New York City, 12 to 14 people living. He had many siblings. His father was in a second marriage. He had many children with his first marriage. His first wife died, married my father's mother, and they again had 5 or 6 children. I don't know how many. And they were all living under one roof, all of them in one singular room. So my father was extremely poor growing up. When my father was a young man, so we're talking 18 to 20, around there, and I don't even think my father, I never got this complete story. I don't even think he graduated high school. I know he graduated middle school, or he finished middle school. I don't think he actually graduated high school. So my father started working odd jobs, and then he became an actor. TV was new back then. And we're talking late 1950s, early 1960s. My father was a TV actor, but he was also interested in filming and photography. So he was going to some trade school for photography. But in the early to mid 1960s, my father was also a political activist against the government at the time. And I don't even ask me. I don't know enough about the history of Iraq to know who was in charge in the early 1960s. I don't know. But it was a tyrannical government because my father, as a student activist, was often thrown in jail because if there were student demonstrators in the street against the regime, the government, they would just round them up and throw them into jail. Now, since there were so many student demonstrators, they couldn't keep them in jail because they didn't have the room to keep all these students in jail. So they would beat them up pretty good, try to knock some sense into them, and then they would release them onto the streets. But here was the caveat. By the time my father had been arrested like 3 times, he was blacklisted, so he could not get a job. So basically, the police, the government officials would go around to all the local businesses and said, if you hire this list of people, we're going to arrest you. You cannot hire them. And so it came to a point where my father was about 20 years old and he was blacklisted everywhere. He could not get a job. No one would hire him. He couldn't do anything. And so he sat at the government official's office and did a sit-in basically and sat in front of his office and said, well, either shoot me and kill me or let me go. Give me a visa. He wanted to go to Kuwait because he knew Kuwait could be a stepping stone to go to like England or France or the US, but he knew that he could not stay in Iraq because he was blacklisted. He couldn't work. He couldn't make money. And so finally, after 3 days, the government official gave him his passport and a visa to go to Kuwait, where my dad, I don't know how he knew anybody in Kuwait, but he basically waited there for 2 years to get a visa anywhere. He just wanted to go anywhere but the Middle East. He was about 21 at the time. Finally, a very, 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 very distant cousin, probably like 15 times removed, somehow procured my father a student visa for 6 months to study photography and filmmaking in Detroit, Michigan, of all places. And this man was the CEO, president of a dairy company called Melody Farms. And at that time, if you had a very, very, very distant cousin who lived in the United States, they could, finagle. Some people sponsored other people, but this was not a direct relative. So you could not sponsor someone who was not a direct relative. But he got him a 6-month student visa and paid for his airline ticket. And he came over to Detroit, Michigan. But the thing is that people who did that at that time, who were business owners, they kept you as an indentured servant, which means they would give you minimal room and board, but then you had to work for them basically for free to pay off your airline ticket or any travel expenses. So my father came to the United States, and I think it was around 1963, 64. Don't quote me on that. I'm not really sure. But he came to this country on a student visa as an indentured servant to this owner of Melody Farms at the time. And he worked in the factory, and he probably came here with like $5 in his pocket, just a little bit of pocket change. And then he lived probably with like 10 other men in a small room who were also doing the same thing, kind of working off their plane ticket and travel expenses. Then my father paid off his debt and worked his way up. He started after that as a truck driver for a potato chip company. He started working in other people's stores. So Iraqis at that time, and still, right? They were business owners and they had grocery stores, kind of like liquor store, grocery store combinations in downtown Detroit. Then he was working as a person, like a cashier or a stock boy in some of these grocery stores, just seeing what he could do to make it work. That's my father's backstory. So very poor, kind of working his way into the country. And the problem at that time, so we're talking 1963, 64, right? So you think like everything that's happening today is very tragic. In 1963 and 64, it was very routine for immigration to go into these Iraqi businesses, and I'm sure other ethnicities as well, but my dad was Iraqi, into these Iraqi businesses and round up all of the workers, put them in a paddy wagon, and interrogate them, because they knew that most of them were illegal immigrants, that they were on a temporary student visa or they were on a visitor's visa, but they certainly were not legal. And so my dad got rounded up, but that is a story for after I introduced you to my mother. My mom came from a family, a working class family. My grandfather was an electrician. When she met my father, she was a waitress. She had a high school education. She did not go to college. She was a waitress at a local diner. I think she was either transitioning to working for the phone company at that time as a telephone operator, but for all intents and purposes, she did not have a lot of money. She meets my father around 1965, and they start dating, and they were getting engaged pretty soon after they met. So neither of them had a lot of money, and they met, they got engaged, and by this time, it was probably 1966, 1967, around that time. And my dad, so my dad was working again, trying to make some money to maybe open his own business. So he was working at somebody else's business in order to try to open up his own business. And it just so happened that when he wasn't there, a bunch of his coworkers got rounded up and put in the paddy wagon. And what they would do is they would interrogate them for hours to try to rat out a bunch of other people. So basically what they said was, if you give us a list of like 10 people who are here illegally, we will let you go. Like, we will give you a green card or a permanent resident card or a temporary resident card, but we will let you go. And if you don't, then you are immediately getting deported. Now, a lot of these men already had families. Like, they were either meeting people or they had people from Iraq that they were already married to and they had kids. And so my dad's name came up as one of the people that was illegal, an illegal immigrant. So what happened was my mom and my dad immediately got married at the Justice of the Peace. So both of them were not doing so well financially, but they did get married so my dad could stay in the country. Now let's fast forward, because I think this is important. So now you have the background. Let's fast forward to when I was born and like what I was born into. So if you know anything about Detroit, Michigan, now I was raised about 20 minutes outside of Detroit in a suburb of Detroit in a very, very small town. But if you know anything about Detroit, Detroit's not the safest place to be. And back in the 1970s, 1980s, it was really, really dangerous. It was dangerous and it was poor. It was really dangerous and really poor. And I would say it probably makes Compton look like a walk in the park, because it was really, really bad, super violent, really dangerous. I'll tell you some of the things that I was taught just growing up, but very poverty-stricken and very, very dangerous. So my parents get married. I was born 3 years after. My mom was pregnant before she lost the baby at 5.5 months. But then I was born in 1970. My parents lived in a trailer park at the time that I was born. So I was born into a trailer park. At that point, my father did finally open up his own business. He owned a butcher shop with another man who was a cousin, distant relative, in downtown Detroit on 8 Mile. And when I was about 3 years old, and by that time, I think we had moved into a very small home, and it was a home. It wasn't a trailer in a trailer park, but it was a very small home because my father was starting to make a little bit of money as a butcher in downtown Detroit. My father got held up at gunpoint. And so he got held up at gunpoint in his store, and that scared the living daylights out of him, obviously, because he had a daughter at home and a wife at home, and he valued his life. So he left his business. He just left it. He left his business and decided to do something else. And I think it was probably around that time that he started working for a tool company, a tool and die company. So Detroit is called the Motor City for a reason. At that time, it was really the hotbed, the hot seat of factories that made cars, notably Ford and Chrysler and General Motors. Well, they needed parts to make their cars. So my dad was a sales representative for a tool company that sold tools to these factories so that they could make their cars. So I think he transitioned over at that point to become a salesperson. Now, my dad has hustle. My dad can hustle. He was very much a salesperson. He was very much good at talking. And the thing is, he came into this country not speaking a lick of English. He did not speak English at all. So he had to learn English pretty quickly. But I know I got my gift of language from him because he was able to pick up on the language. And very soon after that, lose a lot of his accent. He still had a little bit of an accent, but it was pretty undetectable. So he was able to be a sales guy, after moving up from working in a factory, being an indentured servant to Melody Farms, to being a potato chip driver, right? And then working in other people's stores, having his own store, having to abandon his own store because he valued his life, and then working as a sales guy for the tool company. My mom was not working at the time. I think she was either selling Tupperware or doing Avon or something like that. But when I was 5 years old, my parents divorced. And it was at that point that I think my childhood memories kicked in a little bit more. I do have some early childhood memories, but we were living in another house that my father had bought at that time. My parents divorced, and I'm not going to go into their story as to why they divorced, but they divorced. And my father was still trying to make it. I think for a while he moved in with his sister before he was able to get his own home. And my mom did not have an education, as I mentioned, and she was not working at the time. And so my mom decided to go back to school. And she at first wanted to study nursing, but then she went back to school to study to go into education. And because we didn't have any money, when I say we didn't have any money, we did not have any money. My dad was making a pretty good living, but we're talking like barely making it, right? We're not talking about even middle class at that point. So we literally did not have any money. My mom did not have any money, zero, zilch, nothing. And so she's left in this house, and she did get the house in the divorce, but now she has to make mortgage payments. And she had 2 small children. I was 5, my sister was barely 2. She wasn't even 2. And so we had no money. My mom decided to get a job as a hostess and as a waitress at 2 different restaurants, and got some financial aid, took out student loans, got grants to go back to school, I guess go to school, right, to get her bachelor's degree. And then she had to, of course, get another degree to teach school. So that took a really long time. And she was going to school part-time and working part-time and trying to raise us kids. But the environment, I just want to give you a picture, because I think this is important as a connecting point. The environment I grew up in was that we were like really dirt poor. We had a house, but that was pretty much it. When I was under, let's say 10, 11, 12 years old, my mom would make our clothes. We really did not get new clothes. She would sew our clothes. She would make our clothes. We were on welfare. We had food stamps and all of that, right? We had Medicaid, which meant that we could only go to one specific clinic. And if you wanted to go to the doctors, you had to wait 4 hours to see the doctor because everybody else was just waiting to see the doctor. The mentality was that we were poor. That was the mentality. And I did some inner child work really recently. And I went back to my inner child about money. And I asked my inner child, and I'm going to be doing some exercises on this in an upcoming course that I think is going to be so powerful. But I went back and I asked my inner child what age it was. And my inner child that spoke about money was 5 years old. And the 5-year-old said, "I'm afraid we're going to lose the house." Well, that was a mantra that I constantly heard. I constantly heard from my mother, "We're going to lose the house. I'm not able to make the house payment. We're going to lose the house." That was kind of like a general angst or a general mantra that was resonant through my entire childhood. And I often, at 5 years old, 6 years old, I often had to pick up the phone and talk to bill collectors because my mom refused to do it. She would ask me to pick up the phone and talk to the bill collectors. She didn't want to talk to the bill collectors. Most often, we were about 3 payments behind, 3 housing payments behind. And I know this because I had to talk to the bill collectors. And usually before they'll foreclose, I think you can get 3 payments behind, and then you have to actually make a payment with all the late fees. And so we didn't go out to eat. We went out to eat with our grandparents on special occasions. We ate hot dogs and mac and cheese most of the time. That was our meal. Like I said, we had food stamps and really nothing else. I know at several different times, the church paid for our mortgage, the Salvation Army paid our mortgage. We were recipients of the Salvation Army food baskets on several occasions of every single holiday. We didn't really go out to eat, even to fast food. And when we did, I remember we would like couch dive for like pennies and nickels and dimes in order to gather up enough change to be able to go to McDonald's. And like my sister and I had to share a small fry. I think when you're a kid, though, you don't really realize how bad it is. When you're a little kid, when you're under 10, let's say, it's just normal. That is normal life for you. You don't realize how poor you are. You don't realize what your life is like. You just are coping in the moment. You're coping with what is reality for you. And so that's how I grew up, like really poor and then coping with reality. And not knowing until really I was in school and starting to compare myself to others that I really understood where we were at, what caliber we were at, because I didn't fully grasp it until I started looking on the outside and comparing. So my mom was a survivor. My mom went to school when no one in her family went to school. Not a single person went to school to get a college degree. My mom was the only one, and she did this all on her own. Now, of course, with some government aid, some government help, but she had to do all the studying, so she actually did it. She had the wherewithal, she had the personal power to be able to do something with her life, something different than anyone in her family had ever done. And my dad was also a survivor. My dad, who was thrown in jail in Iraq, grew up in total poverty, who had absolutely nothing, who came to this country with nothing as a servant for 2 years, and then worked his way up to be able to make something of himself. Now, I saw my father getting higher and higher in income level, getting higher and higher in his lifestyle. And I saw my father working very, very hard. My father was a very, very hard worker, but he also played hard. So he did allow himself some life's luxuries. He played golf. He liked to go to the gym. He liked to do fun things with his friends. So he did work hard and play hard. My mom, not so much. My mom was a hard worker, but I think she kind of capped out with teaching, and then she didn't really do a whole lot of other stuff with her life. She didn't really expand in a lot of other ways. But from a very, very, very young age, I had this voice inside of me that said, Michelle, you have to get out. You have to get out. You gotta get the heck out of here. You gotta get out of Michigan. This is craziness. This is crazy. So let me tell you how crazy. It was normal for us to learn that when you're driving, you do not look into the cars beside you, because drive-by shootings were very normal. Meaning someone didn't like the look at your face, they would take a gun and shoot you through their window into your car window. Very common where I lived. That carjackings were extremely common, that you locked all of your doors. And if you don't know what a carjacking is, it's basically when someone comes in with a gun, overtakes your car, and you're screwed, basically. So carjackings were extremely normal. And we were even more poor than the Black kids that were in my school because they were wearing fashionable brand shoes and driving Cadillacs and Lincoln Continentals, which were the popular cars at the time. And that's not what we had. I think when I was a kid, we were driving a beat up old station wagon that was a hand-me-down. So that's what we had until a boyfriend of my mom's co-signed on a new Mustang, but a tiny one, not a fancy one, but a tiny one for her. So we were driving around in a beat up old station wagon at the time, but we were so poor that the church was basically paying for my tuition to go to a Catholic school. I think my mom did pay a little bit, but you had to apply for financial aid, and we certainly got the financial aid. And when I say the Black kids, I wasn't trying to be racist, but I'm just saying that 50% of the attendees of our school, because I lived outside of Detroit, were Black, and they were probably seemingly way poorer than we were, but we were the ones getting the school scholarships because my mom certainly could not make the payment to send us to Catholic schools. But that's where we were. And I think that's really where I noticed the difference in income level, because I was never allowed, or we didn't have the money for me to wear any name brands of anything, anytime, anywhere, any place. And there were other kids wearing, even though we had a school uniform, they were wearing like name brand shoes or name brand jackets or had a name brand backpack or purse or something. And I certainly didn't have any of that. But I had this voice inside of me that said, you have to get the heck out. You have to get the heck out. This is not healthy. This is not normal. This is not good for you. And I don't know where that voice came from, probably from my higher self, probably from my soul. But I knew that that lifestyle was not the lifestyle I wanted for myself. I knew that living in poverty and being on the brink of losing our family home and being on food stamps or having handouts from the Salvation Army and the church constantly and being embarrassed because I was wearing clothes that my mother sewed for me or that I got from Kmart or Kresge's instead of like Saks Fifth Avenue or even Hudson's at the time, which was the big department store, which, you know, later on as my mother was getting some money through teaching, probably in my middle school years, we were able to go shopping at like Hudson's or JCPenney, right? But that was probably not until I was about 12 or 13 years old. But before that, for my first 12 years, you know, it was just basically like surviving. Really, that's what it was. But this internal voice inside of me was like, you need to get out. At all costs, you need to get out. And so I took every opportunity that I had to try to find ways to get out. And one of the ways that I intuitively knew was a way out was through my education. And I did not take that for granted at all. I never took my education for granted. And in fact, for me, education was an escape because the poverty was one thing, right? The poverty is something I've never really talked about. The abject poverty of like being on the brink of not surviving. That was one thing. But the dysfunctional family part that I do talk about in some of my books and I do talk about it in some of my videos, that was another thing. And, you know, a lot of my cousins on my dad's side, I mean, they became criminals. So drug dealers, criminals, gang members. A lot of people on my mother's side became, you know, alcoholics and mentally ill, like severely mentally ill and mental hospital needing mentally ill. So there was a lot of dysfunction around me, but there was also a lot of dysfunction in that family unit. So I knew that school was my escape. I knew that those 6 hours at school was the time that I could find the sanity that I needed and get the education that I needed to get the heck out. And again, I knew this from a really young age. I'm talking 5 years old, because as a 5-year-old, even though I don't have a great memory of it, as a 5-year-old, that was not fun to feel responsible financially for the family, but I knew I couldn't do anything about it. But having to talk to bill collectors on the phone at 5 and 6 and 7 years old, and even beyond that, I knew that was not the life I wanted for myself. I knew it. I just didn't know how to get out of it. But then I figured having an education would help me get out of it. So I started to read books. And I didn't own a lot of books, but I would go to the library and I would take out the max number of books you could take out. So I don't know if it was 12 or 13 books at a time. Every time I went to the library, I took out the maximum number of books you could absolutely take out. And I would read every single one of them cover to cover. Because for me, there was something inside of me that said, reading, education is your ticket out. It is your ticket out. You need to do something with this life. You need to get out of this. And so I did that. I made my education priority number one. It was my escape, but it was also my ticket out. And I knew this on some level, even if I could not articulate it at the time. The second thing I did was I started to work at a very young age. So at 10, when I was 10, I had a babysitting business. I didn't call it a business at the time, but I literally started going door to door to door in my neighborhood, asking families if they wanted me to babysit. So I would go door to door at age 10, asking them if they would hire me as their babysitter. And they did. A lot of them did. It's crazy to think about it. Do you have a 10-year-old at home? I mean, Is your son or daughter 10, maybe even 9, 10, 11? Can you imagine them babysitting other people's babies, toddlers, preschoolers, kids? I mean, a little crazy to think about it now, right? But I did. At age 10, I had a babysitting business, and I knew that having my own money as well was a way out. And so I would babysit often 3, 4, 5 times a week. And that money was so that I could buy clothes or toys or whatever that I wanted to buy. And, you know, there were some more humiliating points to that, where at some point around that age range, my mom decided to start cleaning other people's homes. And it was, again, when I say embarrassing, it's not that that is an embarrassing thing to do. But what ended up happening was extended relatives on my dad's side who were doing really well with their businesses, like they hired my mom to clean their house. And so when I say that, that was embarrassing, right? Because they were part of my family, but they were more well-to-do. And here my mom was cleaning their house, but I had to go with her and clean their house. So I was probably 11 and 12. And I just found a diary where I was writing about this, that at that time I wrote the fact that, oh God, it's Sunday, I had to go to church, and then I had to go to this person's house and clean their house. So I started working at a very young age too. And I had jobs from age 10 all the way through, I had jobs all the time. My mission was to get out of the socioeconomic level that I was at. My goal was not to be a victim of my circumstances, but to rise above those circumstances. My mission was to take every bit of learning and education that I could possibly take and somehow use it to help others, or use it for myself to expand and grow, and to be able to become my own person that was not defined by my background. I mean, I had other disadvantages. Like I said, I'm half white. When I say that, it's because I have Arab blood. I'm obviously not white, but I grew up in a very white area, a white neighborhood. I mean, the neighborhood I grew up was like very blue collar, white. I'm not even gonna say the name, but it was a suburb of Detroit, but it was like a neighborhood that was uniquely white, but kind of like white trash white, you know? And going to my Catholic school where it was very divided, half black, half white, but I was kind of like in between. I was not white and not black, but a lot of, you know, kids didn't know how to treat that. And they had names for it, which I will not mention here. So there was that, like not being completely white or completely fitting into that group, and not being black either, right? So there was a lot to overcome, but I never let it get me down, in the sense that I always had a vision. I always had a vision for my life that where I was at growing up was not the place I was going to stay. That was definitely not the place I was going to stay. And so that's really why personal power is so incredibly important to me, to be able to convey it to you through my videos and through my books, because I really believe that you make the difference in your life, your situations, your circumstances, your background, your socioeconomic level, your color, your race, your gender does not make a lick of a difference if you decide that it will not make a difference. I say this from firsthand experience from, God, like the reason I don't like talking about it is because I don't like to dwell on that past. I don't like to dwell on the past that was my reality. I don't like to dwell on that past that was something beyond my control, obviously, right? I didn't consciously make the choice, maybe unconsciously, maybe my soul did, but I didn't consciously make the choice to be in that situation growing up. I did not make the conscious choice to be put in that position where I felt financially responsible for my mother or my family, or talking to bill collectors, or not having enough money to pay the mortgage, right? I didn't ask to be in that situation necessarily from a conscious level, but it's what I lived, right? It's what I lived. I had that voice inside of me saying, you need to get out of this. You need something better. You need to move beyond this. And so I did. And so when I ask you to do the same, when I ask you as my viewers, as my readers, to move beyond your limitations, your limiting beliefs, to move beyond your situation, your circumstance, when I ask you to move beyond the things in your head that are telling you you can't do something, that it's not possible for you to do something, that external forces are preventing you from doing something, I hope you can now understand that I feel that that's just BS, right? As Tony Robbins would say, that's a belief system, but it's also BS, right? And that's why I'm so emphatic about this. That's why I'm so non-apologetic about it, is because I lived it. And I didn't only live it in my childhood. There have been mountains that I overcame, and I'm still overcoming, by the way. Some of you think that like I'm living the dream. I don't know if some of you think that, but some of you might think that I'm living the dream life here in Southern California, but I'm still on my uphill climb. I hope you know that. I'm currently on my uphill climb. I'm not coasting, not even coasting, not yet, not in the least, still on the uphill climb. There have been many mountains that I've had to overcome throughout my life. And honestly, I think that's what makes me a good teacher and a great writer, right? And I'm going to pat myself on the back for being a great writer. But that's really what makes it. It's all the learning and the growing and the learning and the growing and the learning and the growing and the incessant learning and growing, because it's only from that perspective and place that you can teach others. You can only teach others through experiential knowledge. Book knowledge will only take you so far, but when you have that visceral experience of, I have been there, I absolutely know what life is like on the other end. I would like to know what life is like on the opposite end of that. I really would. I'm getting there, hopefully someday. But I really know that personal power is where it's at, and that anything else, you're just settling. You're settling for a lie, really, right? You're settling for an excuse. You're settling for a lie. And if you don't like that, that's okay. There are other people who will sugarcoat you and tell you that, you know, it's great to be a victim and things like that. Like, sure, that's great. A lot of them are still living in Detroit. A lot of them are still living in my hometown, right? Because that's what they believe. But I hope that this helped you to understand why I do what I do a little bit better, because I feel that that's really, really important, especially as I'm moving into this new phase of my teachings where I'm talking about unconditional self-love, because gosh, guys, that's where it's at, to be honest with you. That is where it's at. It has been a lifelong journey thus far for me to learn that. But you know, those lessons started back then, before I was even born. Before I was even born, really, from my father's history to my mother's history to then my history. So much started way before that. And I am where I am today because I believe wholeheartedly in taking every opportunity that is presented to you and expanding upon it, and never making excuses for your life, never in a million years making any excuses for your life. You have the power within you to change in the next second. So I'm going to leave you with this. Every moment is a choice. What will you do in your next moment? And I feel like that's going to be my message now. That's going to be my tagline. Every moment is a choice. What are you going to do with your next moment? So thank you so much if you've made it till the end of this video. I want to thank you for joining me. You know what to do. Subscribe, hit the like, put a comment, all that jazz. Thank you so much for supporting my work. And please do join me on Monday, February 16th of 2026 to learn more about learning a mantra-based meditation with me. Sign up at the link below and I will see you in the next video.